Hi, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio, where our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guests in this interview may not represent those of the host or the station. Folks, I have a very special guest with me today, and yes, I get very excited about my guest. And today I have with me a girl after my own heart. Her name is Elsa. She is a media studies professor, historian, media critic, editor, writer, and author. She is also a deaf-blind disability rights activist. She does fencing. She's a hiker. She's a 2-time Hugo Award winner and 9-time finalist. She also won a Aurora Award for her work on Uncanny Magazine. And she was also featured on PBS American Masters documentary called Becoming Helen Keller, which I highly recommend to watch, and the link will be in the blog. Elsa Sahunson wrote the book Being Seen, One Deaf-Blind Woman's Fight to End Ableism. I want to welcome Elsa to Chatting with Betsy.
Thank you so much for having me, Betsy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, you are welcome. It is my pleasure as well. Elsa, I loved your book. I felt your energy. I felt your passion. I was here when I would read it, yelling, "You go, girl." I just, you opened my eyes. I have to say this. I am very involved with the disability community. My son has a cognitive disability. I worked with the severely disabled. And your book opened my eyes to topics that I never thought of. And I want to thank you for being open, being honest, and writing your phenomenal book. And I always ask the authors, what motivated you to write this book?
So I have been working in the field of media studies and criticism for about the last 12 years. And I had been writing sort of the same essay over and over and over again about different movies and TV shows and books that had disabled characters in them. And it was always the same thing. This representation is problematic because, and what I realized was that there was a book there. There was the longer story to tell than just a 500-word essay, because the problem wasn't just one single media item. It was actually dozens upon hundreds of pieces of film and TV and books that were informing non-disabled people about what it's like to be disabled without really actually telling the true story.
Yes, that's true. I myself do not like how some movies, TV shows portrayed someone who has a disability. Nor do I like how some people treat those who have a disability. And I have seen it up close and personal. And I can only imagine what you have went through, and I read about what you went through in your book. Can you explain to the audience what is ableism?
Ableism is the ism that affects disabled people. So if you know what sexism is, if you know what racism is, if you know what homophobia is, those are all issues that are centered around specific minority groups that are essentially describing the hatred and dislike by society that is put upon those marginalized groups. So ableism is hatred or distrust or dislike of the disabled community in general. And it manifests in a whole lot of different ways. It shows up in the way that we use language. It shows up in the way that we treat disabled people. And it also shows up in the way that we literally structure our society and our world.
And that's very, very true. Thank you for that. And you can, like I saw it firsthand. People stare. They don't treat people with respect or dignity. And you know what, Elsa? that's what you bring out in your book, too. Everyone wants to be treated with respect and dignity.
Absolutely.
And, did you ever notice, like if they have trouble understanding English, that people tend to speak louder thinking that person's going to understand? Or if someone is in a wheelchair, people will either look over them, look past them, not talk to them because they think because they're in a wheelchair they can't speak or think, which is not true. Or if somebody is walking with a cane or needs an assisted device, people think, oh, well, I can't have a conversation with them. That's not true. You can. And I'm so glad that I raised my son not to be afraid and to, not be afraid of someone who is in a wheelchair or a disability. Actually, my son used to come to work with me sometimes. I would get my check, and he would go right up to the clients. And some of them, he couldn't go right up to because they could, hit him. But, he had no fear at all. And I think, Elsa, and I worked in a preschool, children, they don't care if somebody has a disability. It's the parents who start with their bigotry, just like with their color of their skin or ethnic origin. And everyone plays together in the sandbox when they're young. And I just loved your book. And I want to ask you, what movies, if you can name them, in particular, did you not like how the disabled was portrayed?
Well, we can start with Me Before You, which is a film that is categorized as a romance movie. It's also a book. And it's not a romance story. The disabled character in the book does not experience romance. The disabled character in the book his parents hire an incapable caregiver for him. She gets a crush on him, sits in his lap, they flirt a little bit, and then when he commits suicide, he leaves her all of his money. That is not a romance novel. And yet, it's categorized that way because it is about a disabled person, and we're supposed to feel badly for the disabled person and feel like he got some sort of special life experience before committing suicide. And that's just not the way that disability should be portrayed. Disabled people have successful relationships, they get married, they have kids. So if that's the romance novel that people are trying to say is good, we have a major problem.
Yes, and the scent of the scent of the woman. What is it? The Scent of the Woman? With Al Pacino.
Woman, yeah.
Scent of a Woman. That's it. What did you think of his portrayal of somebody who's blind?
I didn't love it. I think that it fundamentally makes blind people look like cranky, unpleasant people. It also shows, again, this is a theme. It shows a disabled person being cared for by somebody who isn't actually trained to care for them. It's just a random teenager this time watching over a blind man as he wanders around New York City. And Al Pacino's cane isn't even a white cane. It's a black cane that he flails around and it never touches the ground. And people constantly tell me, oh, you should watch it for the tango scene. And my response has been, well, I dance tango, and I'm better at it than he is. And this whole sequence is just really disrespectful.
Did you ever watch The Other Side of the Mountain?
I have not seen
that. Because I wanted to ask your opinion, but that came out, you were just a youngster. And, at the time, because it was late 70s, I believe, she was a skier, and she had an accident and became disabled. But there was a love story, and, the guy took care of her. But, at the time, I thought it was really good. But now, I don't know. My views have changed since then. And can you tell us, give an example of movies or shows who have gotten it right?
There is a horror movie which you can watch on Hulu called Run, and it was written from the perspective of telling a story about a disabled woman who is in a toxic relationship with her caregiver. Her caregiver is her mother. Her mother is psychologically abusing her and is trying to keep her from leaving home to go to college. This is not an inaccurate scenario. Caregiver abuse is a rampant issue in the disability community.
Yes.
And the way that they deal with this story is really smart. They also have a wheelchair-using actress in the lead, which means that the portrayal of being a wheelchair user is accurate.
Thank you for that. I have to say, Elsa, in your book, which opened my eyes to many things, and one is, and I just have to say this because I never thought of this until I read your book, women who have a disability are more prone to be assaulted, sexually assaulted, molested, and not being believed. I mean, women as it is are not believed. But then you add someone who has a disability and they don't, they're not going to believe them. I never thought of that until I read that in your book.
Yeah, it's a pretty shocking statistic. So for those who haven't read the book yet, the statistic is that 85% of disabled women will be sexually assaulted once in their lifetime, and 45% of that 80% will be sexually assaulted more than once. It's also 50% of deaf girls in their childhoods will be molested. And these statistics aren't shocking to members of the disability community because we all know that we are seen as lesser than and that our voices are not heard. And so we become really easy targets for predators. And so that's part of why it's so important to have these conversations and to show people that we are not victims for people's pleasure and that our voices need to be heard and respected.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I worked in a state institution back in the 90s, and I had heard of stories of some disgusting people that for a father or anyone to rape their daughter who is severely disabled is they should just cut off their you-know-what. That is disgusting. I was told that. I was like, and I wonder why when I would go near this client, she didn't like anyone touching her because she was abused. And she couldn't talk. And then I heard of and this was a male client who was abused by his mother. This is just so unacceptable. And you're right, people do not tend to believe people who are disabled. And I always treat everyone like I want to be treated or I want my loved one to be treated, and with respect and dignity. And I would talk to the clients. I love the clients. And some of them could not talk. And they would say to me, Betsy, who are you talking to? And I'd say, I'm talking to the clients. They'd go, well, do you know that they can't talk? And I said, I know that they can hear, and they're human beings. And I talk to them.
One of the things that I notice a lot that with non-disabled people is that they assume that because people cannot use oral speech, they are unable to communicate. And that's actually a major falsehood, and it also harms relationships between disabled and non-disabled people. The assumption should be that people have ways of communicating.
Yes, definitely. They definitely had their own personality and communicated. And that's so true. And smile. This one client, he would cough. I'd put the light on. He'd cough until I went over to him, and I would pretend to dance with him, and he would just be cracking up. And, that gave me great joy, Elsa. But I've also noticed that my husband, he had early onset Alzheimer's. And as he progressed, he walked as if he had Parkinson's. He had the shuffle. He was hunched over. And the stares the stares that people would give, the rudeness. And, here in New Jersey, you know what it's like living in New Jersey, Elsa. They'd run you right over. Lack of patience. Yes. No patience at all. And just like I feel like saying, where are you going? Or what are you staring at? Take a video and let it go viral. And I think, this is my own opinion, Elsa, and I have seen this. When people have a disability, a lot of times people treat them, and I'm talking medical professionals, without dignity. They don't care.
Oh, absolutely.
And this is wrong, folks. Go ahead. I want to hear your story, Elsa.
I have received the worst medical care of my life in New Jersey, actually. I had a doctor who would not treat me with respect or dignity, and in fact wanted to sterilize me so I couldn't have children because they believed that I would pass on my disability. So it's absolutely true. The medical profession is in fact trained not to respect and not to understand the disabled experience as valid, because it's based on the concept that we are broken somehow and the medical system needs to fix us.
Yeah, absolutely. I have seen it where I had to fight and advocate for my husband for dignity, end-of-life dignity. Mm-hmm. They didn't believe. I cannot believe, Elsa, and I know this from working at the state facility. Why do doctors and nurses think that just because you have a mental or physical disability, you don't feel pain? I don't understand that at all, and it makes me mad.
It's entirely true. It's entirely true. So yeah, it's a real problem that there's not a whole lot of empathy for disabled people, and that doesn't just extend to the medical profession, but I've seen it from family members of other disabled people. I've seen people who just assume that because you're disabled, you don't have emotional pain either. It's really shocking. And it's because of this ableism that permeates our society.
Yes, absolutely. I have seen clients where I worked they went to the hospital and come back in a disgraceful condition that they didn't go out with, but because they are disabled, and even though they get checked on, well, if it was me who went to the hospital to check on them, I would have opened up my mouth, come back with deplorable conditions, and that's so unacceptable. I certainly hope that in 2022, soon to be 2023, that it is changing. And I'm thankful for people like you, Elsa, myself, other people who are advocating. And when we see, I keep telling people in my support group, when we see an injustice, we have to speak up or nothing will change. And you are speaking up, and you are a voice, and you are a fierce advocate, Elsa. And I just love that about you. You're just amazing to me. And I had to ask you as to, you were brought up, you didn't go to a special, ed school. You were mainstreamed, and you didn't learn American Sign Language. Your parents wanted you mainstreamed. Did you find, I'm sure you found it difficult, but do you think it would have been easier if you were in did learn sign language or not?
I should have learned sign language. I think that that's one of the big misses from my upbringing, because all deaf people of varying hearing ability should be able to sign. It's our language. It's part of our community. And not having that tool is actually a real detriment. I feel like part of what was going on with my parents and with my education is that the pressure to mainstream children is coming from the idea that it's better for you to not seem as disabled as you are. And so what I actually think should have happened is I think that I should have been able to get the tools that I needed within the education that I received, which is very different from saying I should have gone to a deaf school or a blind school, because those schools are great and they're important, and I probably would have also done very well within those environments. But ableism thrives when we segregate disabled kids from non-disabled kids. So what I actually think we need to be doing is bringing the skills that disabled kids need, like sign language and Braille, and all of that, to students who are being mainstreamed, rather than segregating those skills out.
That's yes, I agree, and I have to ask you this, Elsa, because you brought this up in your book, and I have heard this from other people. When people see you, do they automatically want to help you and they just grab you, which throws you all off balance? Or you would rather them ask, can I help you?
I wish people
rather
would,
than just take it upon themselves.
I would rather people talked. People need to talk. People need to use their voices and ask if people need help. Because when you grab a disabled person from out of nowhere, first of all, you're violating their consent and their personal space. And would you really do that to a non-disabled person? Because if the answer is no and you're only doing it to a disabled person, you have some unlearning to do. But secondly, like we discussed earlier in the podcast, a lot of disabled people have trauma. And so grabbing a disabled person from out of nowhere without their consent is going to trigger their trauma. And that's really just, that's not a way of helping someone. That's a way of harming them. So always use your voice. Always say, hi, do you need assistance? And then if somebody says no, the response is not to yell at them. The response is not to shame them for not wanting help. The response is to say, okay, that's great. Have a nice day. Because you would not believe the number of people who have screamed at me in the middle of the street for not wanting their assistance.
No, my. People could be such idiots. This is why one of the reasons why I have my show, Elsa, is because I want people to know other people's views, other people's life stories, and to help make this world a better place. I know myself, if I see someone who is walking with a assisted device, walker or cane, if I see them going into a building, I say, can I open the door for you?
Yeah,
and they, ask them. I would never think of just grabbing someone. And you're right. Would we as abled people want someone grabbing us? No, of course not. And this, again, treating people how you want to be treated yourself. Mm-hmm. And that is just, how people should be treated. And you brought something up in your book, Elsa, that is so right on, and that you talk about the problem of working and Social Security, and if you make too much, you get your Social Security taken away. I can 100% vouch for that, because my son he almost made too much money and almost got his Social Security taken away, and he had to get his hours cut. Now, minimum wage went up to $15 an hour, and that's wonderful. But you know what, folks? It also hurts people that have disabilities because they cannot work as many hours as they would have liked, because then they get their Social Security taken away. I'm glad you brought that up in your book, and I'd like to hear what your opinion is. Tell the audience.
Well, I think one thing is that if the minimum wage goes up, then the maximum for what you can make should also go up in order to allow for the inflation that we're experiencing. Disabled people are currently being impoverished by the state. There's literally no other word for that. It's putting people in poverty. You're not allowed to save over $2,000. You're not allowed to make a certain amount of money. That's a real problem. And the fact is that puts a lot of things out of reach, including marriage. If you marry somebody who makes more money than you do and who then gives you more money than Social Security allows, your Social Security ends. So not only does this impoverish disabled people, not only does this situation disenfranchise disabled people, but it also doesn't allow disabled people to get married.
That is true, because I know people who will not get married because of Social Security getting affected. And I know that.
I want to talk about something that's related. For disabled people
Sure.
who do get married, there are extreme risks if you get divorced. The state of New Jersey has something called the Cruz statute, which says that if you have received substantial help for your household, which includes child care or like cleaning, or if you have a romantic relationship with someone that is, quote, supportive of your household, you can lose your alimony. Now, to a non-disabled person, maybe that seems fine. But to a disabled person, that could potentially lose you your alimony just because someone cares about you enough to help.
That is unfair, and thank you for sharing that. The unfairness and discrimination, folks, is you have to experience it in a way to really understand it. And like with most things, and the workplace also, I'm sure you were discriminated against.
Well, it took me 11 and a half years to get a day job. So,
wow.
Yes. I now do have a day job. I work for a company as an accessibility specialist, but it took me 11 and a half years to get that job. And the road to that job was pretty much paved with a lot of ableism and people doubting I could do my job, and people saying, we can't hire you because we're concerned about your disability, and job offers just vanishing once they found out about the accommodations that I might need.
And
none of which, by the way, is legal.
Right. They are supposed to accommodate people who have disabilities. I mean, I understand, that a person is supposed to do their job as long as they could do their job, but if they need accommodations that can be met, then they're supposed to meet them. Is that correct?
It is, but of course the phrase that employers are required by law to use is reasonable accommodations. Now,
right.
If you're a non-disabled person and you know nothing about disability, are you going to think any accommodations are reasonable? Because our society has taught people that it's not. So getting reasonable accommodations becomes fraught because not everybody thinks they're reasonable.
Yeah, that's true. And I can tell you with my son, I won't say the name of the store he worked for after he graduated from school, they would not let his work coach work with him. They were nice to him for 2 weeks, Elsa, and then they said, well, we're changing your hours. He told them his availability, and then they said, well, then you can't work here. And the lady was the real witch, if you know what I mean, and she refused to let the job coach help Josh. And I said, Josh, quit. You don't need this job. I called up the 800 number. I complained to Ethics Hotline. And I said, if you're going to hire people with disabilities, you need to let them have their job coach. And you need to work with their availability that they gave you at the start. I don't know if it's coincidence, Elsa, but after that, they cleaned house, and it was all new people in there. And it was so he found another job. He works for a local bus company. He walks to work, and they hire a lot of people with disabilities, and they are wonderful, wonderful to work with. They work with him, and I just he was very fortunate. And it's unfair, folks, and this is why we need to speak up, because like I said, if we don't speak up, nothing will change. And I also want to ask you, Elsa, in going to college, did you face discrimination during that time?
Did I face my discrimination during what time? I'm sorry, it cut out for a second.
That's okay. When you went to college.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, college and graduate school both had a lot of challenges when it came to disability support. I would say that a lot of what I experienced was actually when I was in private school in high school, though. And the reason why is that private schools are exempt from following the Americans with Disabilities Act and the IDA. So anyone who goes to a private school, they're not protected by certain parts of the ADA because it's a private institution. Public institutions are required by law to follow these particular these requirements, and so disabled students are often disenfranchised if they're in private institutions. I would say that a lot of what I really got bitten by was mandated coursework that we just sort of assign and require for graduation that isn't actually accessible to all abilities. And what I mean by that is PE and math. I failed geometry 3 times in a row, and no accommodations were provided for me at that point. They just expected me to figure out how to pass. But if my brain doesn't work in the way that it should to understand geometry because of a learning disability and low vision, how am I supposed to pass the class?
Right.
Furthermore, how am I supposed to pass PE if I can't see the things that we're supposed to be playing? Dodgeball was a nightmare. Badminton I can't play. Football also requires me to see things flying through the air. I was finally able to convince my school to let me do stage combat, which was entirely appropriate, and swimming and social dancing, all of which were things I was able to do and capable of doing safely.
I'm so glad that, you probably became an advocate at a young age.
I did.
Right?
I was raised. Well, I was raised by an AIDS victim. My father had AIDS and HIV in the 1990s, and so I grew up protesting injustice on my father's behalf, and then I became an advocate for myself because you have to as a disabled person.
Yes. Actually, Elsa, I didn't realize I was an advocate when I had to advocate for my son. I knew that if I didn't speak up for Josh, no one else was going to, and I had to fight for him. And same thing with my husband, and myself as far as health care. We have to be our own advocates. Very important to speak up. And you're talking about geometry. When my son was he was mainstream for a couple of courses, and math was one. And he had a witchy teacher, old school, and I said, can you give him the work so he could go back to his class, and then the special ed teacher can work on it. You can accommodate him. You know what she told me? I don't have to accommodate him. I don't have to accommodate him. I said, and I said, oh, yes, you do have to accommodate him. That's the law. And I called up the principal, and I said, I want my son removed from that room or I'm calling up Trenton.
Sure.
And I even told the special ed teacher, I said, I will call Trenton on this teacher. She goes, don't do that, Mrs. Sloan. Sloan's my married name. She goes, just get him out of the room. Because, you know what? When you know the law and you know your rights and your child's rights and your own rights, you have to speak up. I keep saying that because I can't impress it enough upon people that we need to speak up. And I also want to point out that you are an activist in many things. You are a gay rights activist, and I just, admire your spunk. You're very spunky. That's what people say about me, spunky. But you're just on fire. And I just want to encourage the audience, folks, you got to read this book. It's so inspiring and motivating. And I love that, Elsa, that you said in your book that, you don't care if you offend anyone, which is what I say to people all the time, that you hope that you offend people enough that they want to do something. And I get that. That's what I said too. And what would you like able people to do, Elsa? What's a call to action for able people?
Sure. I mean, I think it's very simple. If you think that disability doesn't affect you, it does. And choosing to ignore it doesn't actually serve you in the long run. So make a point of noticing whether or not things are accessible. Consider whether or not your favorite restaurant or your favorite bar or your kid's school is accessible to disabled people. Not just disabled kids at the school, by the way, but also disabled parents, because there are disabled parents out there. Because the responsibility to change our society doesn't just lie with the people who are most affected by the issue. It actually lies with everybody.
Yes, that is very true. And where can people purchase your book, Elsa?
Anywhere books are sold. Amazon.com has it, and your local indie bookstore does too. If you contact Elliott Bay Books in Seattle, Washington, and let them know you want a signed copy, there are plenty.
Oh, that is awesome. And how can people get in touch with you?
You can use snarkbat.com, which is my website, and it has a contact form if you're interested in sending me a message.
And I did check out the website, folks. It has so much information about Elsa on there, and you really want to go on Elsa's website to know more information about Elsa, because Elsa Shunnison, you are my type of gal, and I hope you stay on fire. I hope you continue to do your advocacy work, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. The work that you're doing to make abled people aware of what people with disabilities experience, what they go through, and how abled people can help make this a better world for people who do have disabilities. And it's so important. And you know what I have to point out, Elsa? And I didn't know this really until I experienced it myself. There's not enough handicapped parking spots. I noticed that. And there should be more family bathrooms in malls, in restaurants. So what do you do? I couldn't go into a men's room with my husband. I had to make sure that our son was with us. And we need more family bathrooms. We need more handicapped parking spots. You don't realize it, folks, until you need a disabled parking spot, handicapped parking spot, of how little there are in a huge mall parking lot. That is for sure, and I definitely learned that firsthand. And I want to thank you, Elsa, for coming on Chatting with Betsy today. It was a pleasure talking to you. And
Thanks so much
I just
for having me.
You're welcome. I really admire your spunk, and I just think you're wonderful. Folks, I want you to buy this book. I really do. Being Seen, One Deafblind Woman's Fight to End Ableism. Read it. Buy it for your friends. Give it out as gifts, because the world needs to know what it is like to experience prejudice, discrimination, and to be treated without dignity. And do I get emotional? Yes, I get verklempt, because I saw firsthand how people with disabilities get treated, and I don't like it. I do not like it at all. Respect everybody. Treat everyone how you want to be treated, or how you want your loved one to be treated. And I want to thank you, Elsa Shunnison, for coming on again and for writing your book. All the information, folks, will be in the blog, so please read the blog that Jeannie White, station manager, writes. Thank you, Jeannie. And Jeannie White also produces the show. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, who's CEO of Passionate World Talk Radio, who makes this all possible. And thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing the show. Please share the show, because when you share the show, you are helping others, and you're helping me carrying on in my husband's memory. And folks, I know I'm not disabled, but I know what it's like to have a child with a disability and a husband who had an illness that causes disability and how they're treated. I have seen people, how they are being treated. And again, I'm going to say it's not right. I'm going to do a call to action. I want everyone who's listening to this, think about how you treat someone with a disability and how do you want to be treated. If you were walking with a walker, if you were in a wheelchair, if you needed a cane, how do you want to be treated? And help make this world a better place for those with disabilities. Because I'll tell you what, folks, as we're aging, no one, and I'm going to say no one, is immune from having a disability at any moment. As you get older, you don't know what's going to happen. Nobody knows what's going to happen. One accident, God forbid, one accident can lead you being having a disability. And then you're going to see things a whole lot differently. So this is my soapbox that I just cannot help, because I really am very passionate about how people with disabilities are treated. And I want to see more respect, more dignity. I hope the medical community treats people with disabilities with respect and dignity from the beginning of life to their end of life, like they should be. And yes, I am very strong and passionate about that. So I want to thank everyone again for listening. Chatting with Betsy is free to subscribe to on iHeart, Spreaker, Spotify, Amazon Music. And as I always say at the end of my show, in a world where you can be anything, please be kind and shine your light bright, because it would be a much better world if we all did. Thank you, everyone, again. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio. Bye-bye now.